Starting trouble, controversy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is Conspiracy Wednesday. Conspiracy Wednesday. Have you ever been to jail?
Y'all.
Did it seem like it was a money-making phenomenon? All right. But yeah, you guys, we started this out last week, dealing with this whole issue of the American prison system. In fact, we came up with a piece that was entitled, "Is America Addicted to Prisons?" And it's all about the financial empire that is the American prison system. So a lot of people feel really strongly about this one, Vic.
Yeah, I mean, but, okay, what's the solution? Somebody's got to pay for it, right?
I guess.
And we have a system of incarceration, right?
I guess.
Can't be free unless you want the government to go ahead and totally finance it, right?
I guess.
You know what?
So we got to have some way of making money.
Well, I'm just saying.
Off of these people.
I'm saying, if somebody says, you know what, we shouldn't pay for them at all. Okay, I understand that. So where do they house them at?
Well, they're going to house them in Louisiana.
So where do they put them at?
Well, that's the issue.
See,
the issue is what do we do with them?
Right.
And also the philosophy behind it, because right now when states are strapped for money,
right,
there are a number of states that are actually positioning themselves to be the incarceration capitals.
Right.
And as we've long said here, in this U.S., there's been a controversy where we have more people in prison here than anywhere else in the world.
True.
Okay. In fact, we have more people in prison, in jail, awaiting trial.
That's right.
Than anybody else in the world.
Right.
So we have both the most people in jail.
Right.
We got the most people waiting to be charged and actually get processed.
Right.
Regarding jail.
Is the whole
more than China and South Africa?
Well, is our system the legal representation, the incarceration, the process? Is it a paid machine that all tends to reward a lot of those who are on the other side of jurisdiction? Meaning that because from all those who participate in the process, is it a financial reward for them for what they do and how they do it in our legal system? And I would say yes, it is. From the attorneys to the judges, the prison systems, the security, the contracting of what? Services, foods, to pay for them. Where are they losing money at? Where's the money being lost at? I'm just asking the question, because then if there's no money lost, then it's a system of success financially, or is it a failure because the state is strapped from other areas? Because it's being included now, but when it's a healthy state economy, do we complain about the prison systems the same way?
Well, that's part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And the question is America addicted to prison? Let's take a look at this first piece, Vic, to sort of set up everything.
This is the story of a dangerous business, of the billions of dollars that flow into the American prison industry and the companies that profit from it.
Billions of dollars a year are spent to lock people up.
No nation on the planet holds more of its people behind bars. 2.3 million prisoners, as many as China and Russia combined.
We're on a prison binge. We're addicted to incarceration in this country.
$74 billion a year spent on corrections. More than 750,000 employees. That's more than the auto industry. Small towns trying to get in on the boom.
You were trying to get the Guantanamo detainees here at one point, right?
Hey, man, we're desperate.
There are architects, healthcare, and technology companies, all after their piece of the billions behind bars.
It's a country that is addicted to imprisonment.
These companies have a financial incentive to keep people locked up for as long as possible.
It's a system that's out of whack, isn't it?
Billions behind bars. Inside America's prison industry. Premieres October 18th only on CNBC.
And we turn now to the prison capital of the world. The state of Louisiana has a higher prison rate compared to any other country.
Now let's stop that for a minute as we go into this. As you can see, people have been talking about this, because it's the privatization of that industry too, Vic. And, they privatizing the schools. I think it's the same people. The prison systems and the schools.
Right.
The same people.
Right.
But they're privatized. Thank you, Blog Talk. But it's getting to be a big issue. Matt Mac McAllister says that in Washington State that they're building prisons for people who are in preschool.
You know what? There are adults in preschool. I understand it. There is a place, right?
Well,
yeah, okay. Still, the question is, who's the bad boys in this? I mean, if there's a bad, if you start somewhere, let's just say that nobody makes no money on this. So how do you go about the incarceration process and that it can be successful without everybody getting their piece of the action? How do you go about doing that?
Well, first, it has a lot to me to do with your intent, right? If your intent is to rehabilitate people and help people, you have to do at least those things that are proven to work. Not a lot of different things proven to work.
Well,
if you're going to at least try, you got to at least try the things that somehow work at getting some of these people back to work, because that's really what it is about, Vic. If you think about it, think about the number of your vets that's going to end up in jail. Now, we talked about the number that's going to be homeless, over half of them homeless.
Right.
So a bunch of your vets are going to end up in jail.
That's the treatment before they're in jail.
Right.
And there's a group that deserves to be in jail.
Are you talking about the hardcore criminals?
Right, because I'm thinking in terms of those who are saying, of course, if you do, is prison systems or are prison systems made to rehabilitate? No, they're not. They're not there to rehabilitate necessarily. They're in there to incarcerate.
Well, that's right. Well, you're right. First of all, do we agree on what the purpose, right, of the prison system? I did some looking. Yeah, I did. Well, see, that's what the whole issue, Vic. It actually, take a look at it historically, which doesn't mean we have to do it that way.
Right.
If you go back in time, pretty much all punishments were what they would call corporal punishment.
Right.
There were no jails. There was no place to take you. The only jail they had was the jail waiting for you to be brought before the judge or whoever was going to give you your sentence.
Right.
But after then, in the old days, every punishment was corporal. They dial it right there. Okay, 50 lashes off of his hand, off of his foot, off his leg. Now, what happened was, as far as I understand from the reading, is that the whole concept of locking someone up came about actually as part of the Amish.
Right.
Or at least some of the religious in that area they're attributed to them, who in an effort to deal with crime sought to segregate people as opposed to applying corporal punishment. In other words, instead of just hanging you and whipping you, they decided it was best to put you away from the people as a punishment, and that you would want to be back with the people.
Right.
Which actually turns out to be still one of the major things used in prisons to motivate good behavior. It's amazing how much we want the company of others.
Well, no, I understand.
When you go long enough on your own,
loneliness
you will get to a point where you will be
right.
So we know that these things came about actually as an attempt to be more humane. But that's part of the thing, like you said. Do we agree? A bunch of people say, listen, prison is for punishment. I want you to go there and get your ass kicked every day. Just get ass kicked.
Right.
You deserve prison. We want you jacked up all the time.
Right. Right.
So, and the question is, how do you feel? Do you feel about that? Now, remember, you have a larger number of the people in your prisons nowadays, Vic, who are not in there for violent crimes. That's another part of the story that makes it so controversial.
There are degrees.
Right. They're in there for blue-collar crimes or for drug-related crimes.
Right.
And now you have people who are getting the same treatment as convicted murderers, rapists.
Right.
So the question is, first of all, are those types of things appropriate? Those types of things. But like you said, if it's punishment, see, in the old days, the idea was part of the punishment was to throw you in there with convicted murderers and rapists and have them, do whatever they do to you.
Right. I mean, there's you're going to hear the stories of people who did, a simple crime, a theft, stealing out of a grocery store, whatever, something like that, and they get thrown in the mix. That's some hard time, And so
especially if they got cute booties.
Right. So there's a place where the stories are there, but we're really looking at the system, because the story that you're looking at is here to say, look at everybody getting a piece of the action. I say, okay, here's the alternative, that it is not run by privatization or by the state. And the government comes in and says, well, when we run it, it runs like Guantanamo. What's your option now? Which one do you want? Do you want privatization?
Well, the question is that the choices. See, that's the whole thing. And that's a very good point. Is that what you want? Is privatization the answer? Now, Vic, we got a number of states. Louisiana, hard-strapped You know, usually Louisiana and Mississippi,
Right.
usually they go back and forth at being the brokest states in the country. They compete for it.
Right.
For who's the most broke.
Yeah.
Louisiana and Mississippi.
Bad.
Okay? So now Louisiana, they want to have the prisons.
True. I understand that. Yeah.
Because they want to make some money.
That land. Now they can make that land to use. I mean, I'm not knocking Louisiana, but Louisiana, on one hand, people wanted to rebuild its economic value post Katrina, right?
Well,
and you can't pick which way it is necessarily, because it has to be a revenue earning opportunity.
Exactly. And let's be personal for a minute. A lot of us think this designed to make money off of black people.
Yeah.
Okay, throwing black people in jail. They already throw us in jail.
And or minorities in general.
Exactly.
In general.
We talked about the cocaine laws, where the cocaine that black folks use has 10 times the penalty as the cocaine that white folks use.
Yeah.
People say, well, don't use no cocaine, smoke weed. Well, whatever. The point is the disparities that end up causing people to be in prison.
Right.
And then to have those outcomes. Well, let's take a look at this piece, you guys. Everybody know about Louisiana, home of the Red Bones. And let's find out what they're doing and how they're trying to capitalize on this industry.
And we turn now to the prison capital of the world. The state of Louisiana has a higher prison rate compared to any other country. And the rate of inmates in the state surpasses that of countries the U.S. considers to be less free. It's reportedly 3 times greater than the rate in Iran and 7 times greater than China. Take a look at these statistics that will really put it into perspective. 40,000 inmates, or 1 in 86 Louisianans, are behind bars. There's more than 2,000 private prisons in the state, and they hold more than half of Louisiana's inmates. The private prisons are, it's a very profitable business, a $182 million industry. So as you can see in Louisiana, the prison industry is profitable. And there's big incentives to put and keep people behind bars. To talk more about the prison industrial complex in the state, Alternate's Rania Khalek joins us now. Welcome, Rania. So what's behind this astronomically high rate in Louisiana? It can't be that there's more crime in the state.
Well, no, it's not that there's more crime in the state, although Louisiana does have a really high crime rate. The problem is the fact that there's a lot of these small rural towns that have local privatized prisons that are run by sheriffs, and then a couple of them are run by companies, or by a couple of companies that make a lot of money off of more.
The sheriff runs the prison.
It's the more,
That's a
you know,
conflict.
it's the private prison system, the way the private prison system is run. It's a conflict of interest, because the only way to make money is to have more inmates for the state to pay for you to house.
So now, so what it sounds like is that this is really ingrained in the system, from the sheriffs to the judges to the whole justice system. It seems like this is a systematic problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you have an economic model set up where you have anybody making a profit off of locking people up. So you don't want the prison population to go down, because then you won't make any money. You'll go in the red. So you need to keep people in your beds. And in Louisiana, you actually have these sheriffs who are running these local jails who are in rural areas. They don't have enough prisoners from there, so they actually have to call around usually to more urban areas and see, hey, do you have any inmates for us? And this also makes it really hard to reduce the prison population when you have such an invested interest in keeping it high. So you have a lobby, right, which gives campaign contributions and lobbies against any kind of new legislation that might reduce mandatory sentences, right, or life without parole, and all these policies that keep people in prison for so long. In Louisiana, they have some of the most draconian and harsh of these kinds of things, where the judge doesn't have any discretion. People are just sentenced to, a certain amount of years for really non-violent and sometimes petty offenses.
And is Louisiana a safer place because of this, or what are the effects of this?
No, the crime rate is higher. I mean, there's no correlation even between the idea that locking more people up gives you more safety. And on top of that, Louisiana actually locks up has more nonviolent offenders locked up than violent offenders. So it's actually these people that they're locking up are generally, because the people in these local prisons, which make up 53% of the prison population there, are not violent offenders. In fact, violent offenders get to go to state-run prisons in Louisiana, which are far better facilities if you think about it in terms of offering rehabilitation programs, education, and ways for people to better themselves.
Now, since this is obviously a huge business in Louisiana, is it seen as a job creator, not only for the prison, the owners of these institutions, but as employing people in the state?
Well, yeah, I guess you have some guards employed, but actually with private prisons, they tend to try and keep costs so low that they're not, especially in local prisons. I mean, they don't have a medical team prepared. They don't have, that's being employed. They don't offer education programs. It's not as though this is creating so many jobs that it's worth it. And in fact, you could say that you're locking people who could be in the workforce. You're putting them behind bars rather than allowing them to be a productive member of society. Also, the money that gets spent on private prisons by the state. That's money you're taking away from other programs, right? So you're taking it away from education. You're taking it away from programs to help lift people out of poverty. You're taking it away from programs that might help people get jobs. So, you're spending it on locking people up instead of helping the public become a better place for people to become productive members of society. So you can't make that argument. Yeah, it doesn't work that it creates jobs. Although you could say that because in these rural communities, it's set up where the community is actually reliant on these prisons for some employment, so that also could make it harder to shut them down in the long run.
So, Rania, is there any incentive in keeping people out of prison?
Well, I guess profit-wise, for these companies, no. For society, absolutely. But as long as we have this system where we allow companies to profit off of putting people in cages, then there's going to continue to be an incentive to keep the prison population as high as possible.
Imagine that for a second. The sheriff in the town has an ownership interest in the jail.
Right.
He probably sees you in the bar and say, I'm going to get you, Leroy. Right. I need to make me some money for Christmas. Go on and mess around with lose that again. Right. I'm going to put you right back up in there, boy. You better watch out.
Have they... That's a good one. So they have found a way to make it work? See, I want to figure out... I'm trying to figure out where is it where people go like, people shouldn't be getting enriched by this. I said, is there any effect on those who have to serve the crime? Is there any abuse of the incarceration?
Well, that's what they were saying here.
So what is it?
So that's what she was kind of saying. When you have these kind of setups, imagine a small town.
Right.
So now everybody depends on the prison. So you're going to be more likely to send people to the prison.
Right.
Now, also the effect is that you're removing people from the workforce.
Right.
And now you're going to have to pay to take care of them.
Right.
So here you have the poorest state, one of the poorest states in the country.
Correct.
And they have a policy, 2,600 jails, and so that's obviously a money drain,
right?
And look where the money's going to. Is it going to people who are taking it out of state? Because obviously the corporations are big corporations.
So what you're
and some of the little ones are going just to certain people, though.
Right. So really, what the economy in these areas need to be stimulated to give them other opportunities of revenue. And better than what's right now fueling that rural area and community. Because the sheriff's saying, okay, say if I'm not doing this and nobody's doing it in our area, there's no enrichment, there's no money. You're waiting for somebody to come in here and to invest in development. It's not going to be redevelopment, probably, new development. So you're not going to get it. So your options is nothing or what I'm doing. What do you say then?
The option is maybe you got to prove your options.
No,
because that's, in other words, that's the oldest argument always has been. When you have a lot of poverty,
that's right.
You need security. That goes back to when the king. Why do you think the king built a moat around his castle and had all those guards? Because when you have all the goodies and the folks don't have nothing, they coming to rob you.
Right.
So you got to have security.
Right.
So that's where all this comes from.
Now this is a crazy question, and I'm just going to I'm trying to find out where where they all of a sudden says, is this better or worse? Okay, we're advancing in technology. Let's say 25, 30 years from now, that we actually can have a colony on a different planet where we take all the prisoners and put them there.
That's a movie. Ain't that a movie?
Right, yes it is.
They have to have when they took the whole New York.
Right.
Right, we just locked up all of New York and put all the prisoners in there.
Right.
Let them go free.
And a lot of your politicians are business and entrepreneurs, owners, and somehow or another they may be tied in either the goods and services, not necessarily the contracting or anything like that. And they says, you know what? This has turned into a wonderful thing. The privatization of getting the aerospace industry contracted to the lowest bidder, the best quality, all this comes into play, but the prisoners have to go to another planet. Is it the same?
That's going to make visitation a bitch.
I'm just saying, what's the problem?
Well, the problem is, first of all, making sure you identify the correct people.
Same.
That's for always been a problem.
Same.
And making the crime fit, the punishment fit the crime.
Same.
Which is
same.
the whole concept behind an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Right.
That was actually to say that you don't take somebody's life for a tooth.
Right.
Okay, it's not, people use it, the quotation, to mean other things. That means I should be able to get you back.
Right.
No, it's really saying that the punishment should fit the crime.
Right.
You don't take an eye for a tooth.
Right.
You know, you're supposed to take a tooth for a tooth.
Right. See, now we're getting into something it's a little different now. That's why I'm sitting up here saying, is this about the geography, or is it about the practice of those who are in law, who are governing over institutions, like the sheriff situation? If that's a conflict, let's just say you remove that conflict, but still the high income for that community still is with somebody who's an independent contractor, construction, and they still have these same conditions. I said, you guys feel better now? It's not the sheriff?
No, well, but then again, that's the same as saying if we have prison on Mars, you have to send them up there to be the prison guards. So I get it. PMC's talking about prison on Mars. And they're going to probably drop you off like that rover, right? The rocket comes, and they pull over, and then all of a sudden they just put out a parachute and drop your monkey ass down on Mars.
See, I wish, you know what I wish I would have learned more about, and I didn't research this, because a lot of times the subjects we have are to walk in the show here and just start off without knowing any background knowledge. That's how we do it. But I would love to know as it relates to where the breakdown in the economy around the pre-PRISM system of the revenue that's making on top of what they're doing now. What happened to lose their economic base, and that it's all falling into the prison system?
Well, okay, that's a whole nother story. In other words, you're saying what happened to the cities to make them so broke. Well, that's another. That gets us into the huge political discussion.
You can't wait until this happens to then all of a sudden start clamoring. I said,
true,
well,
but let's say it's already occurred.
Yeah,
because you have right now. The latest thing, right, is different cities. Like, for example, within California, you got 3 or 4 cities right now.
Right.
2 already declared bankruptcy, right?
Right.
You got 3 or 4 more other cities on the verge of bankruptcy.
Right.
Are these the kinds of... Should Compton have their own prison system?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
To house their own inmates. See, I guess, okay, let me ask you this.
Right.
Do you inherently feel that there's some bad intent behind those who are administrating these things? In other words, the controversy comes that people feel that these systems are being set up for people of color. In other words, they're saying the society sets up conditions conducive to you being a criminal.
It's a number
You have
game.
no opportunity. You have no opportunity. You got to steal to eat,
right?
Or you got to hustle to eat.
I think they take full advantage of it.
So you think? So you do agree that that's part of the controversy?
Oh, I think it's a big problem. I think they sit there and go, "Look, here's a high crime area. Wow, guess what that means? Look at the numbers. You know, I can sit there and do that with cities. Everyone says, you know, here, more policemen should be in this area. Why? We have to hit our quota. We have to have arrests.
Because actually, that's the part you would see, right? You would think there'd be more police in the high crime areas. Right. No, there's more police in the affluent areas to keep the high crime people out.
Thank you.
That's what you actually see. You don't see them trying to solve the crime. In other words, we would say in the community, if the rapist is living over here, come over here and get him.
Right.
Don't stay over there and protect them.
That's right.
Come over here and get the rapist out of them, get the robber, come to here where they live and get them.
Right.
As opposed to making sure they're safe and they have a safe mode and a safe zone in the ghetto.
Right, and I know one thing that nobody wants is when somebody throws their hands up and says, you know, there's high crime, we can't house all the prisoners, they're not building no prisons, and right now we have an economic downturn. the crime rate is going up. Oh, you know what? We can't put the prisoners nowhere. Let them run. Let them out. We have to release them. Overcrowded. I said, I know what you're going to do then. You're going to say, help somebody keep them where they're supposed to be. It's the situation relative to what they're going through, right?
Right. Well, therein lies part of the controversy.
Yes.
See, part of the controversy lies in the fact is that do folks that be allow things to occur in order to create the situation. For example, here's a conspiracy. Let me give you. When the plane hit on 9/11, there are a bunch of people who said there are a lot of businessmen who jumped up right now and told their women, "Oh, you can get that summer house,"
of course,
because they're about to write a blank check.
Yeah,
they're going to write a blank check. If you got to sell anything,
it's about to go up.
Tampons, T-shirts, you about to spend.
Afro shame.
So there are people who have always said part of the reason why crime is allowed to occur in the cities is to allow for people to cry out for help.
Right.
Then they willingly give away their civil rights. That's the whole thing. That was one of Huey Long's quotes, that the next fascists will come marching in, disguising themselves as patriots, trying to say, we coming to help you by bringing security. Bring all the guns, bring all the police, bring all this, because they need to spend that money. I was the one who said, even back when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I said it back then, wow, the biggest enemy of the United States just stood up and fell over. And no one knew anything. You never heard anything from the CIA or FBI. They had you just do a big, massive buildup against your supposed threat of the Soviet Union. And one day those bad boys did this. Yeah, pow. It just fell over.
It's all money.
So what I said then, watch for the militarization of your police. You got to spend that money somewhere. Watch your police start to look like the military. Because they're going to start to sell it to them.
I mean, the whole system.
That's going on with drones.
The politics and everything, for the most part, is based on where they can spend their money and where they can collect their money. And then after that, then they institute, whether it's programs, whether it's legal, whether it's redevelopment, whether it's new development. Stop the money flow. Just stop in any political environment wherever you go. Stop the queen from having the royalty. Take the jewels away. Do whatever it breaks down the system. No matter what, the issue to me is that you need to pay attention to the area you're in, even if it's in a poorish condition. The hard part about it is that most people are caught off because they're dependent on the system to fix it for them. And that's where it gets, we feel bad for those who are in poorish conditions because they're usually dependent.
They stuck with the criminals. That's what
we feel bad about.
They're not getting no help. They're going like, hey, I'm over here living with the murderers. I got to go down the street to the grocery store past Mr. Murderer every day. And so I want something done to protect me. When are you going to do something to protect me? And they're not doing anything.
No, it's the part.
Protect you.
It's the part that there's a thing where you look at third world countries and you really can applaud them in certain conditions that they're their own hustlers because they go, we don't have what you guys have in many places. This is what we eat is what we sell. What we sell is what we eat, and they do the best they can to go out and sell you goods and services. They're heavily dependent on situations that come out of their effort and energy. We're just in a very strong capitalistic society that says, the government's going to have your back with some programs. And then, of course, the enriched areas and new development are always going to be built. They'll never stop those. Construction will never stop. It may cease to redirect its energy, but there's always new development. It's just for less folks under economic conditions. It's for those who can afford it, because everybody's not going to go broke at the same time.
Oh, no. Like we said, even now. In these terrible economic times, understand that it's a buyer's market.
It's always
if you have money right now, you can buy up everything. All the property, whole blocks in Detroit, you can just go in and buy up everything and wait.
If it's the part where I feel bad about, I wish I gained more and more education about this, is studying economics. Always available there in your high school and whether it's college, whatever. Boring. But when you go and understand as it relates to trends and how things are going, there are some strong areas where we'll never go out of business. Medicine,
sex,
food, sex.
Sex always sells.
He's always
even broke, and drugs. Drugs, no matter how broke down you are, you need to get high.
You will.
The worst thing is you got to drink.
Can't do without
something. You got to get something.
But people want to go into what they call the new of something. And you have to look at the trends. It always amazing how gold stays up. It's amazing. Can't eat gold.
You need it for all those teeth.
That's wrong.
You get all those grills right. Well, let's take a look at what else they're saying Let's go back and take a look at this piece from RT. Rania Khalek, independent journalist.
Now, if there is so much money to be made, and if it's so systematic in the state, what can be done to reverse it?
Well,
that's what you were talking about.
What can be done is reforming laws, like reforming mandatory sentencing laws. That, you know, if somebody commits 3 drug offenses, they might get life in jail without parole. You could also, instead of putting people in jail for drug offenses, you could come up with new legislation, or you need to reform laws that put a lot of people in jail, right? But you need the public will behind that, and that's what's not there in Louisiana. And a lot of these more, you know, all of these southern conservative states, and in liberal states as well, is there's this notion of being tough on crime is really, really important. But you know, in the long run, you're just locking people up for nonviolent offenses, and it hurts everybody. So the public will needs to be there. There's ways to reverse it, but not without people wanting to reverse it, if that makes sense.
So it seems like there needs to be at least more awareness about this to kind of get this public response. Rania, now I want to switch gears a little bit to a related issue. You recently wrote an article for Salon.com about a Texas man who was executed back in 1989. He was by the name of Carlos de Luna. A new investigative report by the Columbia Human Rights Law Review now says that Mr. de Luna was likely innocent. Now, you've been covering this in similar cases. Talk a bit about this, and is it an example of a broken system?
Yes, you know, Carlos de Luna, the man who was executed in 1989, he was a very poor Hispanic man who actually had a very low IQ. He basically, like, he had the mental intelligence of a child, and he was sentenced to death for a murder that he always maintained he didn't commit. And throughout the entire process, from arresting to the trial, there was all these signs that another man had done it who looked a lot like him. Another man also named Carlos, who had a really violent history. The police knew him very, very well because, you know, he was constantly hurting people, and he was in and out of jail all the time. And at one point, Carlos de Luna even said, look, this is the guy that did it, and nobody believed him. And so at every, you know, his case really is, it serves as an example of everything that could go wrong in a capital case to lead to somebody innocent, you know, being sentenced to death. And I think that's what's most important to take away from it, is that the death penalty, while lots of people like the idea of putting awful criminals who have committed heinous crimes to death, the whole point is that our system is not perfect. It's always going to be broken. You can never have a 100% perfect system, and it makes mistakes. It puts people behind bars that aren't guilty sometimes, and because of that, we have innocent people like Carlos de Luna, who we don't find out until after the fact that they were likely innocent when it's too late to do anything about it.
Now that's a separate question, but somewhat related. If you execute everybody, you have less folks in prison. If you execute, U.S. really leads. Yeah. When you think about executions, you talk about where we stand in the world in terms of state-sponsored murder, as I call it, right. State-sponsored killing, or executions. We're up there too. Yeah. Not always correct. You know what's amazing in our time? I didn't even know. Well, no one knew the data, for example, on identifying people. Right. When they actually did the studies that looked at eyewitness accounts, do you know, you all, that eyewitnesses have such a high rate of error as to make it almost so unreliable? In other words, specifically when the people say, I saw him commit the crime, I saw that person, they're running 60% error rates, okay? 50, 60, sometimes more. Yeah. So you can almost not even trust. And this is people who are saying, that's the person who raped me. Right. That's the person who I saw shoot so-and-so. So we're learning that eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable. Yeah. Also, after the fact that your mind tries so hard to identify the people, that you start to see people's faces. Like if they show you the suspect, you start to see that face and internalize on that face, and soon that becomes you, the face of the person. Right. But so many people end up recanting these eyewitness accounts. That's one of the things that's coming up as it's now a known fact about how unreliable eyewitness accounts are. That's an amazing thing to find out.
Yeah. No, we know, and it's always the disenfranchised because it's easier. They don't get the representation. They don't have the money. You can't afford a lawyer who's going to put the time in. And then the other bias is inherently may be within that community because the nature of what they believe, either by culture, ethnicity, all these other factors come in that a lot of people, we hope with our system we have, that they do the best job they can, not to have these internal biases that are more organic, as we call it. But you're at the whim if you're in a different community. I mean,
that's the truth.
It's just the way it is. You have to look at it and say the law is the law, but then there's a human factor that we have to deal with every day, depending on where you come from, your background, your economic portfolio, so on and so forth. But if you have a relationship with the governor, if you are close to one of the senators, there's a good chance that they're not going to ride herd on. The worst that you're going to go through is probably some paparazzi interviews trying to get the mic in your face.
Well, go take a look at it, you guys. This has been our controversy of the day. Looking at the prisons. Got to tell you, there's a couple of pieces we were showing. Billions Behind Bars is a piece you can go watch.
Right.
Billions Behind Bars, and we did show it here last Wednesday. Also, there's another one called Prison Nation. And it gives you some really good information about this ongoing issue that we're dealing with right now, which is the growing prison system in America.
You got it, man.
Wow. So, once again, thank you, RT, about that. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Conspiracy Wednesday, the special Conspiracy Wednesday edition of the good news, the bad news, and the other shit. That's right. Conspiracy Wednesday edition, the good news, the bad news, and the other shit. All right.